My nephew called me from a parking lot in Mississauga at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning, and I could hear it in his voice before he even said a word. That particular kind of panic that doesn't come from a car accident or a lost wallet. It comes from something worse, something that's been building for a long time. "Uncle," he said, and then he stopped. "Talk to me," I told him. "She's at the cabin." I was standing in my kitchen in Kingston, holding a cup of coffee I hadn't taken a sip from yet. Outside, the St. Lawrence was doing what it does in February, sitting flat and gray under a white sky, barely moving. I set the mug down. "Which part of the cabin?" I asked. "The workshop. She's trying to get into the workshop, Uncle. She brought someone with her." "I don't know who." "A man." "They're out there, right now." I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked at the river. "All right," I said. "Let me make a call." "Uncle, what's in there?" "She keeps asking me what's in there and I keep telling her nothing. But she doesn't believe me. And now she's right," I said. "There is something in there. But it's not what she thinks it is." I hung up and called the OPP detachment in Napanee. I knew the duty sergeant slightly. I'd met him at a Rotary dinner 2 winters back. I explained the situation calmly. "Unauthorized entry, private property, rural Frontenac County." He said he'd send someone out. Then I sat down at my kitchen table, and for the first time in probably 6 months, I felt something close to relief. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My nephew's name is Declan. He's 34 years old. He works in logistics, coordinates freight movement for a company that ships across the Great Lakes corridor. He's not a complicated man. He grew up quiet, played hockey until his knee gave out in second year at Queen's, finished his degree, got his job, paid his taxes. He called me on my birthday without fail every single year, which put him ahead of most people I knew, including people with fewer excuses. He married a woman named Vivienne 3 years ago. They met at a mutual friend's cottage on Lake Simcoe, and he was, I have to say, immediately lost. She was the kind of woman who knew exactly how to make a man feel like the most interesting person in the room. She laughed at his jokes. She asked follow-up questions. She touched his arm when she spoke to him. I noticed things about Vivienne that Declan didn't or didn't want to. The way she looked at a room when she walked into it, not taking in the people, but taking stock of the things. The way she asked casual questions that weren't really casual at all. She asked Declan once, early on, how often he visited the family property. Just like that. Not your uncle's cabin. The family property. I had a cabin on 40 acres east of Sydenham, on a piece of land my father bought in 1971 for what seemed like a fortune then and seems like almost nothing now. The cabin itself wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, a screened porch that leaned slightly to the west. But the land was worth real money by the time I inherited it, and the workshop I'd built on it in 2009 had a padlock on the door that I never left without. Vivienne asked Declan about it. Then she asked me about it once, at Christmas dinner very sweetly. "What do you keep out there, Harold? Tools and things?" I smiled and said yes. Tools and things. What I didn't say was that I'd been watching her since July. Declan came to me about 6 months into the marriage with the look of a man who was starting to understand something he'd rather not. He didn't say much at first. We were sitting on my back deck in Kingston, watching a freighter move up the river, and he kept turning his beer bottle in his hands. "She wants us to move," he said finally. "From the apartment? She wants to buy a house, something bigger, out in Oakville, near her friends. That's a long commute for you." He turned the bottle again. "She found one she likes. It's a lot." "How much?" he told me. I didn't react visibly, but I did some arithmetic in my head. It was more than he made in 5 years. "She thinks we could get help," he said. "From the family." There it was. I asked him what he thought about that, and he looked at the river for a long time before he answered. He said he didn't want to ask me for money. He said he knew I'd worked hard for what I had. He said he just wanted to make her happy. I put my hand on his shoulder, and I told him I needed a little time to think about it. What I was actually thinking about was a conversation I'd had with my sister, Declan's mother, a few months earlier, right before she passed. She'd been sick for almost 2 years by then, and one of the last clear conversations we had, she asked me to look after him. Not to give him things, she said. To look after him. She knew the difference, and so did I. I drove back to Kingston that night, and I called my lawyer. The lawyer's name is Daisy. She's been practicing in Kingston for 20 years, and she has the particular quality I most value in a professional. She tells you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. I laid out the situation. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she asked me one question. "What are your intentions regarding the Sydenham property long term?" I told her. She said she could have the documents ready within 2 weeks. What we put together was a family trust. The cabin and the land went into it, with conditions attached. Declan was the named beneficiary, but the trust had specific terms. The property couldn't be accessed, sold, transferred, or used as collateral without both my signature and the signature of a trustee I appointed, a friend of mine named Conrad who'd been a chartered accountant in Ottawa before he retired. The trust was structured so that a spouse acquired through marriage had no claim on the trust assets. This is standard practice in estate planning in Ontario. It's not exotic, it's not unusual. It's just paperwork that most people don't bother with until it's too late. I didn't tell Declan I'd done this. I had my reasons. I also had a Daisy draft a letter that I sealed in an envelope and put in my safety deposit box at the TD branch on Princess Street. The envelope was addressed to Declan, not to be opened. I wrote on the front, "Unless something happens to me or unless you need to understand why. The workshop at the cabin, the one with the padlock, I left exactly as it was. Some tools, a snowblower I'd been meaning to service. And yes, something else, something I'll get to. Back to February. The OPP officer arrived at the cabin before I did. It took me just under 2 hours to drive out from Kingston, which on a February morning with the 401 doing what it does means I made decent time. When I pulled up the long gravel drive, there was a cruiser parked near the workshop and 2 people I didn't know standing by a dark blue SUV with their arms crossed. The man was younger than I expected, heavy jacket, work boots. He had the look of someone who'd been paid to do something and was now reconsidering the terms. The woman was Vivienne. She was composed. She was always composed. She had that gift. The OPP officer, a young woman from the Napanee detachment, was standing between the workshop and the SUV with a patience on her face that I suspected was hard-earned. When she saw me walk up, she nodded. "Are you the property owner?" "I am," I said. I produced my identification. I showed her the property deed I'd had the presence of mind to bring from my filing cabinet in Kingston. The officer looked at Vivienne. "And you are?" "I'm his nephew's wife," Vivienne said. "This is family property. I have every right." "The property is held in a family trust," I said. "My nephew has no ownership rights. His wife has no ownership rights. I am the trustee of record." I handed the officer a copy of the trust document. I'd brought that too. Vivienne looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, not guilt exactly, more like recalculation. "I just wanted to understand what's out here," she said. Her voice was calm and reasonable. "Declan never talks about this place, and I thought," "You thought," I said, "that there was something here worth finding." The man in the work boots took a quiet step back toward the SUV. "I'm going to say something about Vivienne that might surprise you, given everything. She wasn't entirely wrong about what she was looking for. She was wrong about what it was, and wrong about who it belonged to, but there was something in that workshop worth knowing about. It just wasn't money. My father built the original structure on that property with his own hands over 2 summers in the early 1970s. He was from New Brunswick originally, from a family that had been fishing the Bay of Fundy for 3 generations before the fishery collapsed and they moved inland. He didn't talk much about any of that. He was the kind of man who expressed things through doing rather than saying, but he wrote things down. After he died in 2003, I found 11 composition notebooks in a box in the basement of his house in Kingston. Personal writing. Not a diary exactly, more like letters to no one. Things he'd observed, things he'd felt, things he thought about the people he loved and couldn't say to their faces. My mother was in there. My sister was in there. I was in there. I'd read them once, alone in that basement, and I'd put them back in the box and I'd driven them out to the cabin because I didn't know what else to do with them, and they'd been in the workshop ever since, in a fireproof box under the workbench, which is where they still were on that February morning. I had not told Declan about them. I'd been waiting for the right time, which is what you tell yourself when you're not sure you're ready to hand something like that to another person. I walked into the workshop with the OPP officer present. She'd asked to observe, which I agreed to, and I unlocked the fireproof box with a key I kept on my actual key ring, and I took out the notebooks. They were nothing to look at. Dollar store composition books, the black and white speckled kind. My father had written his name on the inside cover of each one, Raymond Whitmore. His handwriting was careful and even, like a man who'd learned to write by hand in a one-room schoolhouse and never quite let go of the habit. I held them and I felt again that particular weight. When I came back outside, Declan was there. He'd driven out from Mississauga after I'd called him back, and he'd parked behind the cruiser and was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at his wife with an expression I recognized. It was the expression of a man who has finally seen clearly and isn't sure whether to be relieved or devastated. He looked at the notebooks in my hands. "What are those?" he asked. "They belong to your grandfather," I said. "I've been keeping them for you." The man in the work boots left without being asked. The OPP officer documented the incident and gave Vivienne a formal warning about trespassing on private property. Since the padlock on the workshop had been damaged in the attempt, there was a charge possible, but the officer left it up to me whether to pursue it. I declined. Vivienne stood by the SUV while all of this happened, still composed, but differently now. The composure looked like effort. When the officer left, Declan walked over to his wife. I stayed by the workshop door and gave them privacy because that's what you do, but I could see them. He talked. She talked. He showed her something on his phone. I didn't know what it was until later, but it turned out he'd looked up the family trust on his way out there and read the whole document for the first time. She left. She drove out down the gravel and turned south on the county road, and she was gone. Declan stood there in the cold for a moment. Then he walked back to me. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. He wasn't accusing me. He was genuinely asking. "Because I wasn't sure if it would matter," I said. "I didn't want to be the one who made you see something you weren't ready to see." I put the documents together. I kept the property safe. I waited. "She's been asking me about this place for 2 years, he said. "I know, the house in Oakville, I know." He looked down at the notebooks I was still holding. "Can I read them?" "They're yours," I said. "They've been yours the whole time." We went inside the cabin and I made tea, proper tea, in a pot, the way my mother taught me. And we sat at the kitchen table and I put the notebooks between us and told him what little I knew about how they came to exist. About his grandfather as a young man, about New Brunswick and the Bay of Fundy and what it means to come from a place that disappears out from under you and have to build something new somewhere else. We were there for 3 hours. By the time we drove back out to the main road, the sun was already low, that pale winter light that Ontario gets in February, where everything looks like it's been sketched in pencil. I want to say this plainly, because I think it's the thing that matters most. My nephew has a good heart. He always had. The problem with people who have good hearts is that they don't always know that other people can see it from the outside, and that some people will drive straight toward it like a moth toward a porch light. It's not stupidity. It's not weakness. It's just that he was raised to believe the best of people, and that belief had costs. Vivian never got into that workshop. She never got her name on the property. The house in Oakville was never bought. The money she was looking for was protected not because I was smarter than her, but because I'd done what my sister asked me to do. I'd looked after him. Quietly, without announcement, years before anyone thought it would be necessary. I've been asked, since then, whether I feel bad about how it all ended. Whether I think Vivian loved him, at least in some way. I don't know the answer to that. I genuinely don't. What I know is that she showed up at my property with a stranger and a set of tools designed to break a lock, and when she found out there was no financial windfall waiting for her inside, she drove away without once looking back at my nephew standing in the cold. That told me what I needed to know. Declan called me last month from a house he's renting in Guelph, on his own now, doing fine. He'd started going through the notebooks. He called to tell me about something his grandfather had written about the first time he saw Lake Ontario. He'd grown up on the ocean, remember, and the lake had startled him, because it looked like the sea but it didn't smell like it, and he'd found that disorienting and then, eventually, beautiful. He wrote really well, Declan said. He did, I agreed. I didn't know that about him. There's a lot in those notebooks, I told him. Take your time. He said he would. He said he'd drive up to Kingston in the spring and we'd go out to the cabin together, maybe open the porch up for the season. I told him I'd have the tea ready. When I hung up, I sat for a while at the kitchen table. The river outside had started to break up. You could see the ice shifting in places, long gray plates moving slowly against each other, rearranging. It happens every year. The cold holds for as long as it can, and then it gives way, and the water underneath keeps going the way it always has. I thought about my father, writing in his composition books by lamplight in the evenings. I thought about my sister asking me to look after her son. I thought about all the things we carry forward for each other without knowing if we'll ever get the chance to pass them on. Some of the most valuable things a person owns aren't worth anything at all on paper. They can't be put in a trust, can't be assessed by any accountant, can't be driven to in a dark blue SUV with tools meant to break a lock. They sit in fireproof boxes under workbenches, waiting for the right person to come looking for the right reasons. My nephew came looking, and what he found was worth more than any property she ever could have taken.